To Literacy for Students with Complex Needs. My name is Maureen Nevers, and I'm a communication consultant that works at the University of Vermont at the Center on Disability and Community Inclusion. So for the next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to talk about literacy, and we're going to start with the benefits of literacy for students with complex needs. We're going to go over what is a good literacy program, and then we're going to talk about some of the common challenges and barriers to that, particularly for our students with complex needs. We will also define the differences between emergent and conventional literacy, which is really important to know. And then we will, toward the end, look at the program profile for literacy that might help you to do some of this work. All right, let's start with who are we talking about here? So we are talking about students with complex needs. And typically that is going to be individuals who have cognitive, language, communication impairments, along with medical or health or sensory or motor or multiple challenges. And they may have a diagnosis of cerebral palsy or Down syndrome or autism spectrum disorders or anything like that. But if there are sort of language and cognitive challenges combined with other challenges, that is someone who has complex needs. So, and let's right off the bat, just talk a little bit about emergent versus conventional literacy, because it's going to keep coming up in our conversation. So here's a quote from Karen Erickson, who's a really strong researcher in emergent literacy. And she says that emergent literacy is the term used to describe the reading and writing experiences of young children before they learn to write and read conventionally. Some examples of these behaviors may include interpreting a story through pictures rather than through text, manipulating books in non-conventional ways, for example, looking at the book from back to front or holding it upside down, scribbling, and the use of inventive spelling. So I think her point here is to say that these are behaviors that move us toward being able to read in a more conventional sense. And they may sort of look like play or exploration, but they're all considered necessary and important parts of that early learning experience. Now, conventional literacy is sort of what we know as typical reading and writing. So decoding or reading fluency or comprehension, spelling, writing, those are the skills that are considered conventional literacy. And in fact, most of our school-age children are going to be working on conventional literacy skills. By the time students get to kindergarten, first grade, they are definitely at a point where they can start working on some of the mechanics of reading and writing because they've had sufficient experiences at the emergent level. That isn't always true for our students with complex needs. As a matter of fact, most of the time, it is not true that they've had experiences that prepare them enough to move to conventional literacy. So one of the things that we need to do when we talk about their literacy program is we need to figure out, are they at an emergent level or are they at a conventional level? Because our interventions and materials are going to change depending on which way we answer that question. So again, Karen Erickson in an interview said that she had identified some key questions to ask to determine a conventional or emergent. And she said basically the questions that she's asking are indicators that the person will be successful as a conventional communicator if they have these skills and these abilities. So I'll show you what they are here. These are 4 questions that you answer yes or no to. And if you answer yes, that means that you have enough skills to make it likely that you're going to be successful with your conventional literacy approach. If you answer no to any of these, that is an indication that you need more experiences as an emergent stage literacy reader and writer. So again, ask those questions. Does my student know most of the letters most of the time? Yes or no? Do they know that writing is made up of letters and words? So if you gave them pictures, would they be able to tell that the text has to do with writing and pictures do not? Are they engaged during shared reading? So when you read a book with them, are they interacting with you and the text as you're reading it? It doesn't mean that they have to be accurate about answering questions, just that they have to be interested in doing that. And then the last is, do they have a way to communicate? If they are going to interact during literacy activities, they have to have a way to do that. So it's critical you answer yes to that question in order for them to move forward. So again, if you answer no to any of those questions, then you want to stay at the emergent level of literacy instruction. And if you answer yes to all of those, then you are ready to move into conventional, most likely. If you have mostly yeses, you may be able to move some elements of the literacy program into a more conventional approach, and the others you spend a little more time with at the emergent level. So this is, again, part of the definition associated with emergent literacy is, while exploring literacy materials, observing print within the natural environment, interacting with conventional readers and writers, and seeing models of how and why print is used, emergent readers and writers are making discoveries and learning about literacy. Karen is always stressing the point that some of the things that we see young children do around literacy may not appear to be learning, but they are. So, again, touching books and turning pages, even if it's from back to front, watching people write things down, all of those are part of what we know as the foundation to later literacy skills, and they're important. So our students with complex needs, they are coming to the table with different experiences and different abilities. And I thought it was important to think about why it might be that so many of our students with complex needs are still at the emergent level when they enter school, and in some cases, our students may stay at the emergent level even with instruction throughout their career in school, which is fine. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't have that literacy instruction, or that's not working. It may be that is as far as they're going to move up the continuum, but they should still be able to make progress within the emergent literacy activities. So continuing those is important. But in terms of why they may be there early on and still in that stage when they come to school, the sensory issues, vision and hearing issues, the motor issues, those really impact the child's ability to interact with print materials in the same way as other kids do. They may not be able to walk over to the bookcase and get a book. If they do have a book, they may not be able to open it or turn the pages. They may not be able to see the print because of vision impairments. There's so many factors that they bring to the table personally that are related to their disability that put them at a disadvantage for participating in those activities. And we know that partners may not give those children as many opportunities for literacy activities, and the ones that they do give them tend to be dominated by the adult, and they have a different quality to them than the ones that their peers would have. So the adults tend to ask more questions and be more directive, and basically the nature of their experience as a young child around literacy is not the same as their peers. So the fact that they're entering school still at emergent level can make sense because of that. And basically we assume that if we pick that up and we start to give them more of the type of emergent literacy instruction that they need, that they will progress on to be a conventional reader and writer. Okay, so let's talk about literacy for students with complex needs. So literacy is a lot of time and energy is spent on literacy instruction for all kids, and with so many other things that are vying for attention for our students in terms of their physical needs and motor needs and medical needs and other, eating and all kinds of things. It's important to know why literacy would be helpful for them. Why would we spend time on literacy when isn't that sort of an academic subject, and wouldn't we be better off maybe addressing more functional skills? Well, I would say based on the benefits of literacy for our students, it's probably one of the most functional skills that they can gain. There are so many ways that they can use literacy to their benefit that it's just an extremely helpful set of skills to have. Even if they don't have to be advanced in their abilities, even small amounts of growth on literacy abilities have tremendous impacts. So some of the things that we know from the literature are helpful would be, one, the cognitive impacts. So literacy can actually improve cognitive performance. So their thinking is improved when they have literacy instruction at letters, words, etc. And then their learning improves. And also their participation in school is enhanced because they have skills that allow them to be more involved in the activities in school, which are heavily based in literacy. They have a whole lot more options for leisure activities, for community activities. They have more opportunities to interact in different ways, both in person as well as through technology. So Facebook or texting or email or things like that. Suddenly now they can use those ways of communicating, whereas without the literacy, they wouldn't be able to do that. They can improve their self-esteem, and also other people perceive them as more competent when they see that a person has literacy skills. It's part of their perception that if you don't have literacy skills, you're not as competent of a person as if you do. So that is helpful for that. If a person actually can use text to communicate as part of their communication system, that's a huge gain. I mean, that's the goal for all of our users, is that they be able to type or write their own messages using letters and words. And when they can do that, they get to move beyond the picture symbols that we've selected for them, and they get to choose the exact words that they want. So their messages are very precise, or are able to be precise. The partners that they can communicate with are now not limited to those that understand their communication system. And the things that they can say are more diverse. So having that text, is really a huge benefit in terms of their communication. And we know that communication enhances literacy, and literacy enhances communication, and it's a really beneficial cycle. So there are just literacy is probably more important for them than it would be for neurotypical individuals, as a matter of fact, because of how much they need it for things beyond academics, etc. So despite the fact that literacy is such a critical need, and that we know our students with complex needs benefit from the same type of literacy instruction that their peers would when it's provided at the appropriate level, many of our students do not have literacy programs. And part of that is, I think, a lack of awareness of how important it is. And then part of it, I think, is not knowing where to start and where to find resources that would help to make this happen. So let's talk about what is the literacy program kind of ideal? What are we hoping that we have for all of our students? And then we'll look at some of the places where we have challenges and getting there and what we might do about that. So quality literacy program, I've divided this up into 5 different areas, I guess, of the program. So what are the outcomes of instruction? What is the process of instruction? What are the materials? How do we measure progress? And what kind of preparation or planning has to take place? So under each of those headings, I've listed some notes about what we would expect to be there for a quality literacy program. So I'm just going to go through those with you so that you have experience with knowing what those are. And the first column is about outcomes. And you see the outcomes that we hope for literacy are the same across all students, because they represent the primary areas of learning in literacy. So those areas don't change based on age or ability. We always want to be learning about letters or parts of words. We always want to be teaching our students about vocabulary or word meaning. We want to work on text, reading of text. We want to work on writing, and the last thing we want to do is work on our communication. So all of those are necessary parts of a comprehensive literacy program, and they will be, say, captured in the standards if you have standards for learning. The range of the standards is represented by those sort of simple words. Under instruction, 2 of the things that we look for, one is that instruction occur in the classroom with the general ed peers and curriculum, and then additional time be provided to supplement that, because we're looking for a total of between 90 and 120 minutes per day for our students for instruction to occur, to give them the amount of input that they need to make progress. In terms of the materials, we want to make sure that the materials are matched with the instructional level of the student. So think about what we just talked about with emergent and conventional. If a student is at the emergent level, we want to make sure the materials are at an emergent level. And the same thing with the conventional. So we want to match the content of those items to their level of understanding. We want to make sure the materials are accessible, so we've made adaptations so that the child can turn the page or open the book or see the text or hear it or whatever they need to do. Because again, we have multiple disabilities. Those things are going to be a factor for our students, whereas they're not for maybe other students. And the last thing that we want to know is that our communication supports are integrated into our literacy activities. So I can't be successful with communication, with literacy, if I don't have access to my communication supports. When we monitor progress, which is the second to last section, we may have some formal assessment tools that we can use. There are certainly some informal tools that are available online with key questions that you can ask so you can determine what skills your student has. Where we should use those as much as we need to inform our instruction, but sometimes if they're not giving us really good information, we want to be careful that we don't spend too much time trying to assess a student when we're actually not getting useful information back. Some of our students with augmentative communication supports, it can be difficult for them to show what they know and to express themselves. And because of that, then we can sort of get stuck with being unsure. Do they know it? Do they not know it? And so then we continue to test even though we're not getting good information back. So sometimes we just have to move forward with where our best guess at where the student is, and then we watch and monitor our activities and we look for signs that they're understanding or that they're not, and we adjust our instruction accordingly. And the last part that we want to think about is the planning or preparation, and that includes our personnel and who it is that's providing instruction. And we want to make sure that the people that are making decisions about the literacy program for our students are qualified to do that and have the training to do that. We know that it's not easy to take what we know about literacy and apply it to someone who doesn't have the same input or output modes or the same cognitive abilities as somebody else. So here's where it can be really beneficial to connect with your general education teacher, because they do have the literacy training that we need, and they can help us to know what the progression of skills looks like, and then we can work on making that progression at a level that our student can access and get to. Okay, so as I said before, we know that literacy is beneficial and it is helpful, and our students can be successful, and yet many of our students do not have literacy programs, and so we have to think about why is that? What are some of the barriers that we are running into that are resulting in either no literacy program or ineffective or insufficient literacy programs for our students. So I'm going to share with you one quote here from a recent article. This says, "The regular English language arts curriculum is comprehensive. Literacy instruction for students with severe disabilities and complex communication needs should be equally comprehensive. It must address all components of instruction that are necessary for students without disabilities to learn to read and write." So this goes back to what we were just talking about with the letters and the words and all of those, the text, etc. Is the scope of what we want to address is the same across students. It's what we do within each of those areas that changes. So the range of content, this is one of the areas that I probably encounter the most, is seeing one or two areas being addressed and the other ones being neglected or not present in the child's program. And so the tool that we'll look at the end is going to help us to see whether that's happening, because sometimes you may think that you've covered all your bases, but in fact, the activities that you're doing are clustering under one or two of those headings. So hopefully that tool will help you to see that and to make some changes. In the column under instruction, the things that we want to think about are meaningful activities, and then how much time we're giving to instruction. So we talked about the instructional time, and that basically we can have great ideas and great intentions, even great plans, but if we don't designate time to allow the student to learn and to practice as much as they are going to need to, then they will not benefit from all of those great things. So making sure that we create time in the schedule for those is important. And then thinking about meaningful activities. So the literacy activities themselves, you particularly at an emergent level, it's all about interest and willingness to engage. So what we do for emergent readers is we entice them to sit with us while we read a book to them, and we try and make it as engaging as possible so that they will find enjoyment and want to do that again. So the more we connect what we're reading to what they know or what they're interested in, the more likely they're going to stay with us and be present for that experience. So making sure that those connections are as strong as they can be, looking again for things that are interesting to the child, or engaging type of rhyming or other language that they might find interesting, or just making the activity exciting for them. That is critical, particularly at the emergent level, because it's what keeps them coming back for more instruction and more experiences. Also, life experiences and world knowledge are critical. If you don't do a whole lot, then you don't have a whole lot to talk about. You also don't get a whole lot of diversity in your language. So the more that experiences just in life that our kids have, the more aware they're going to be of different vocabulary, and then we can tie that into their literacy. So all of those things work together, and they work to build vocabulary, which is, of course, part of communication. So just sort of giving them diverse experiences can also be really important. Okay, so let's look at this quote from Karen Erickson in 2009. Special educators may not fully appreciate the distinctions between emergent and conventional literacy, as their formal training may center on conventional literacy instruction for students with high incidence disabilities. Okay, so she's acknowledging that we typically get our education as professionals around conventional literacy skills, and we feel like we're getting the whole range of training, but in fact, if our students are still at the emergent level, we really don't have any tools in our toolbox to address those needs. So now we know, I know about conventional literacy, but I don't know much about emergent literacy, because I thought that my kids coming to school would already have been through that stage. Now I know they're not. So I need to go back and learn more about what are those early experiences like, what types of materials would be helpful, what are the goals or outcomes associated with that level of learning, because they are different. And again, the training that we get or that we don't get, that will make a difference. The difficulties continue to grow when these students are faced with the conventional literacy activities that dominate the general curriculum before they have had a chance to build an emergent literacy foundation. So now now Aaron Sheldon, who wrote the article that was just referenced, is talking about how if we don't recognize that our students are at the emergent level and we give them conventional level activities, they're not going to be able to benefit from those. So it's like if you had a ladder that was missing a bunch of rungs and you were trying to get from one rung to another one that was way up top. If you don't have anything to climb on, you can't get there. You need to fill in that gap. You need to fill in the parts that are missing first so that you can climb to the top. And no amount of wishing and hoping or trying will change that. You have to go through the steps. So you have to come back to that emergent literacy level if that's where they are and move through that first. And then you can get to be able to actually do those conventional level activities. Okay, so here we're talking about inclusive education, so accessing the general curriculum in the classroom. Effective inclusive educators prioritize changes in special education service delivery to support access to quality instruction in inclusive settings, and that's literacy instruction. So if you believe that it's important for your students to be part of literacy instruction and that it benefits them, then you have to make changes maybe in how you provide services. So there's really good information, including in the article that I just talked about, that demonstrates how much of a difference it is for a student to be in the general ed classroom as opposed to in a separate classroom, and that the opportunities for literacy experiences are tremendously different in the two environments. So when you can get your students in the general ed classroom working on the general ed curriculum at a level that works for them, it's has tremendous benefits to them, and the research is really clear on that. Let's see. I didn't talk out here about age-respectful materials, so even if we need text that's more simplified, we can find stories, books, things like that, that are not babyish or too young. So if I have a grade schooler who is using at an emergent level and is using books that are simpler, I may need to look around a little bit to make sure I find books that reflect interests that would be appropriate for his age. So I would ask myself, would I put this book in front of one of this child's peers? If I wouldn't read it with a peer, then I'm not going to read it with that student because it is stigmatizing, actually. So we know now that there are resources available for books that are simpler, again, but also have age-appropriate topics. So looking for those is really important. Not overusing assessment is making sure that we're using the assessment information that we get and moving on and not continuing to test, because sometimes when we're not sure what to teach, we will test because it's comfortable and familiar and it feels active. And so sometimes I will see students that are choosing the named letter every day. Well, if I ask you to show me the M or show me the P, that's a test. And once I find out if you know it, I should move on to something else. If I do that with you every day, it probably means I'm not sure what to teach you. So I'm going to put some time into that. The partner knowledge, we talked a little bit about that. The last one, I think, is about attitudes and beliefs. And this is so important because this has nothing to do with your really your education or your role. even no money or anything has to be involved in this change. This has to do with your thinking about literacy. So this quote says, "Low expectations instigate a vicious cycle of literacy failure. Parents and teachers have low expectations and therefore devote limited time and effort to literacy activities. In turn, individuals with complex communication needs have few opportunities to learn literacy skills. And as a result, parents and teachers observe limited progress, which confirms their low expectations for successful literacy outcomes." So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't think they can do it, so I don't give them much effort to help them learn. And then, of course, when they don't learn, I think I was right. They couldn't learn. We can break through this cycle. Okay. So I hope that I covered sort of some of the challenges that you might run into and look for that might affect the quality of your literacy program. And now I'm going to show you more specifically how to evaluate what you are doing to see how well it measures up to the expectations of, sort of a more ideal or, higher quality program. So the tool that I created is called the Literacy Program Profile. And I would describe this as a simple structure to help develop, evaluate, and improve literacy instruction and outcomes. So this was developed a number of years ago when I was finding that I was going into schools and asking about students' literacy programs. And I was having a conversation with the educators that was really confusing. It was hard to keep track of what we were talking about, and some of that had to do with the language, some of that had to do with having different training experiences. But it was really difficult for me to get clear information about what was happening around literacy. Sometimes I would get names of programs or a curriculum name, and it didn't help me to know what was actually happening with the student. So I couldn't really be helpful in making sure that that student was getting all of the different parts that they needed. So I created this structure, and I did two things. One thing I did was I divided literacy into 5 parts. And I used the research to do this, and basically decided that everything that we do in literacy can be sorted into one of these categories. The other thing I did was I named the categories with very simple terms. And let's see if we're going to talk about that. Well, here are some not so simple terms. So these are some of the words that I was hearing and I was using when we were talking about literacy that made it so confusing. So phonological awareness and fluency, alphabetic principle, comprehension, shared reading, guided reading, phonemic awareness, concepts of print. These are all legitimate literacy terms, but they are not helping to create a clear, understandable picture of what literacy is. So here's what I did with all of those words was I divided them into my categories and said, okay, rather than use these complicated literacy terms, we're going to put them into categories with simpler terms. And so I do know the formal names of what we're talking about and the research-based names, but I don't use those names when we're talking about a child's program because they tend to get in the way. So then we tend to be talking about, well, what is it that you mean by reading, and what do I mean by, reading, shared reading or something. We start to get lost in our different meanings for things. So the 5 words that I chose to use to categorize literacy would be letters, words, text, writing, and communication. And again, you can see the terms that you might see being used in other areas, and they would be kind of represented by this simpler term here. Okay, so these are the titles that I am using, and they honestly are just more user-friendly for people to be able to access and to be able to describe their students' program. So let's talk about what you're going to do with this structure. So what do I do with those fun words, right? Well, what you do is you describe for yourself, describe to yourself each activity that you do with your student. So if you read aloud to them, if you practice playing with words, any activity that you do that you think is related to literacy, I want you to describe it in your head, and you can write it down if you're not sure, but I want you to describe it, and then I want you to figure out which of these sections does that activity belong in. So I'm going to describe to you in a minute what types of activities go into each section, but you're basically sorting out all of your activities so that they fall under one of these categories. And it doesn't matter if it's just something you made up or if it's something formal. What you need to know is what is the purpose of the activity, what type of activity is it, because that determines where it belongs. So let's take a look at the individual elements. The section called letters. Anything to do with using letters is listed in this section. You would include it here. So if you're doing naming letters, letter sounds, putting letters together to make prefixes and suffixes, taking letters off of words, putting letters on words, putting letters together to make words, anything that focuses on the letter level of a word is listed under this section. And that does include decoding, because when we're decoding, we are paying attention to the letters. They're the most important part of decoding, is what is the letter and what is the sound. So if you are doing decoding activities, you would list them here, and you can just write them down with a very short description or just a single word. You want just something in this chart that represents each activity that you do. So when we come to words, words actually stands for vocabulary, word meanings, or comprehension. So this has everything to do with understanding the concept of a word. So if I'm teaching you new vocabulary, if I'm teaching you about new words and what they mean, anything that has to do with words and understanding what they mean, there has to be the meaning part with it. It can't just be me reading a word without any other information. There has to be a definition, a picture, something that would aid in my understanding what the word meant. So it's like building my vocabulary. Okay, text is the word that I used to refer to connected words. So when there's more than one word Now we're dealing with more than just the individual definitions. We're dealing with what the word means when it's paired with other words. And this typically is what you find in books. So in texts, storybooks, informational texts, things like that. Words are put together, and we have to look at our understanding is based on different strategies because the words are put together. So you might hear the terms reading comprehension or fluency or storybook reading or looking at the text features. All of those are listed under the heading of text. The writing section is a little bit, I think, easier to figure out because it's anything to do with the process of saving and storing ideas that are, expressed on paper or electronically. So you can use, standard writing tools like pens and pencils and markers. You could use a keyboard. Early scribbling is considered writing. So if you have a child or a young child or even a school-age child that picks up the pencil and makes just marks on the page, that is absolutely writing. That's a legitimate writing. And there's some good information online that I think Deanna Wagner is giving you as part of this training that will help to know more about how to work on writing at emergent level. But just know that it's a very important part of a well-balanced program of literacy. And then the last component of literacy would be communication. So anything that you work on related to speaking or listening or language, etc., would go here. So any activities that you're doing with your student that has a focus on communication. And when we evaluate how well this profile that you're completing matches the ideal profile, basically what we're looking for is, are you working on things that are helping the student to make progress in their literacy activities? So are you giving them words that allow them to participate in shared reading? Are you giving them words that allow them to show what they know or to ask questions? That's the type of communication activity that I would look for as being useful for a literacy profile. Okay, so we have, we just looked at the 5 sections and what we would put in each section if we were doing step 1, which is the now profile. So if we wanted to record what is happening right now, that's what we just walked through. But there are 3 other things that we could do with this same form. After we've written in what we're doing, we could go on and compare what we're doing here to an ideal or a balanced or a complete program. So this is a handout that I've created that tells educators what type of information would they be aiming for to have in each of these sections. So once I fill my information in, I can evaluate how does that look compared to what we need to have in those sections, right? And that would be a step 2 if I went and did that comparison. Step 3 would be if I took a list of resources in each of these sections and I used those to figure out how to fill in the gaps. So say, for instance, I filled out this whole form and I noticed that I had blank space here, that I'm actually doing nothing with letters at all. And I came over here and I would read here about what I should be working on with letters for my emergent communicator and emergent literacy child. And then I'd come over here and I would say, what type of activities would I be doing with letters? And here are some actual resources and examples of activities that would be appropriate for working on letters. And they also the same for text and writing and etc. And then the last application is an action plan. So if I've written up my form, I've compared it to what would be a goal, what I'd like it to look like. I've picked out some resources. I just might use this form to say, well, this is the problem with my letters. I don't have any letter activities, so this is what I'm going to do about it. So you can use the same form to write out what changes that you want to make in the program. So let me show you some examples of what this would look like in some of those different formats. Here's the blank form again. And let's see. Here is an example of step 2. So remember, step 2 was the form was already filled in with the information about the program that is going to tell me whether what I wrote is sufficient or I want to make changes. So for instance, under letters, it says my focus should be on letter names, what they look like, and their sounds. So this is for an emergent profile. So if my student's emergent, I would say to myself, am I doing activities that focus on the names of the letters, what they look like, and their sounds? And then I get more information here about I should be highlighting print in the environment. I should be interacting with letters and sounds. I should be highlighting those sounds in words. I should be reading alphabet books and playing letter games. So each section has recommendations for what you would like to see, and then you can evaluate if that's something that you want to add. Here's an example of the third column. These are examples of letter activities that I could do. If I found in step 2 that I'm really not doing some of those letter things, I could come over here and look for some ideas about what I could be doing with letters. And then this is where I would put, again, my action plan. So I'm going to check out certain letter activities, or I'm going to start sounding out words that I encounter in the day. Different things like that could be your plan. And here is an example of a completed form. And I'm not sure if you can read the text, but this was an actual profile that I completed with a team where they described for me what they were doing, and I put all of their different activities in the different sections. So this is an example of one that has been completed where we looked at and thought, okay, good, we have something in every category. We did have something in the communication category as well. But we did identify some things that weren't as strong as we wanted them to be. So we identified some changes that should happen. This is another kind of step 2 recommended practices. So this is a simpler version of the one we just looked at. So telling me what I should focus on and what I should be doing for each of these different sections. And let's see, this is again a step. I think this is the same one that we just looked at. This is a little bit different. This is also recommended what to do, but it is emergent and conventional. So it's a comparison of these are emergent level and this is the conventional level. And clearly this is a work in progress because I have a lot of blanks here. So yeah, actually this one should say needs. This is actually a step 2. So this tells me what I need to do. It doesn't give me any resources for it, but it does tell me what I need to do. And then I just blew these up a little bit bigger so you could see that here's a list of, if I'm emergent, this is what I should be doing with letters, and if I'm conventional. So I'm just giving you a bigger look at some of the examples. So if you complete your profile, your step 1, then you have a picture of what your current program looks like. And if you look at the recommended items on step 2 and determined what you need to change or to do differently, then that is step 2 is done. And then if you go on to step 3 and look for some resources, then you've finished step 3. So you can just use that, and you can come back to it. You can repeat the process and update it over time, but you'll always have a good record of what you're doing and feel confident that you're either doing everything you want or that you're missing something and you want to make a change, and then you'll have a process for doing that. And monitor progress. So these are just the references, and I hope that this was helpful conversation on literacy for students with complex needs.